Jason Carter arrived at his luxury gym before sunrise. What he didn't expect was to find two little girls in rubber gloves quietly scrubbing the machines, and a truth that would break something open inside him. Jason Carter never expected to feel anything walking into his gym before sunrise. For years, the early morning hours had been a sanctuary, just him, the machines, the quiet. No clients. No noise. Just the sound of his sneakers on polished floors and the steady rhythm of breath and repetition. The gym was his creation, a flawless, elite facility nestled in Manhattan's most exclusive district. Every detail, from the lighting to the scent of eucalyptus in the air, had been designed with intention. He walked in that morning dressed in a white tank top and black athletic shorts, earbuds in hand, ready to disappear into his routine. But what he saw as he stepped through the private side entrance brought him to a full stop. At first, he thought he was mistaken. Two small figures moved silently across the floor near the rows of cardio machines, their shapes delicate and out of place in the clean, cold geometry of the space. As he stepped closer, the truth of it settled like a stone in his chest. Two little girls, no older than 7, maybe 8 at most, were working. Really working. They wore oversized yellow janitorial coveralls, red rubber gloves that reached past their wrists, and clutched rags and spray bottles as they scrubbed down the equipment with slow, practiced movements. Their brown hair was tied back in loose ponytails, and even from a distance, Jason could see the shadows under their pale blue eyes. The sight struck him like a blow. In a place where monthly memberships cost more than some people's rent, children were cleaning sweat from machines? He felt his stomach twist in disbelief. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle them, and crouched down a few feet away, his voice soft but steady. "Hey," he said gently. "Why are such little girls working here?" One of them looked up. Her face was serious, far too serious for a child. She blinked, and for a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke in a quiet, even tone. "Our mom works here," she said. "But she's in the hospital now. We're helping so she doesn't lose her job." Jason's breath caught in his throat. The second girl, identical in every way, paused her wiping and looked at him too. Neither of them seemed frightened. If anything, they looked resigned. As if they'd done this before. As if it wasn't strange at all. He stood up slowly, his legs suddenly heavier than they'd felt minutes ago. His gaze followed the girls as they returned to wiping down treadmills with methodical precision. A single drop of sweat rolled down the side of his face, but it wasn't from exertion. He turned away slightly, and before he could stop himself, a tear slipped from the corner of his eye. He hadn't cried in years, not since his mother died. And yet something about these two girls, small and determined in a world that had no right to ask this of them, pierced straight through his well-armored heart. He remembered his own mother's hands, cracked and rough from scrubbing floors at night while he slept on a mattress in a shared room. She had worked herself sick trying to raise him, to give him a life beyond struggle. And now here he was, the owner of this empire, standing frozen while two tiny versions of himself scrubbed away at metal surfaces before sunrise. He needed answers. And he needed them now. But more than that, he needed to make something right. Even if he didn't yet know how. Jason didn't return to his workout that morning. Instead, he stood in the corner of the gym, arms crossed tightly over his chest, watching the two girls move from one machine to the next like clockwork. There was a quiet rhythm in the way they worked, spray, wipe, pause, move, repeated over and over without a word between them. It was mechanical, as though they had learned not just how to clean, but how to stay invisible while doing it. His jaw clenched. No child should ever have that kind of discipline, especially not in a place like this. He walked briskly to the front desk, startling the early shift manager, a young woman named Carla who had just started making coffee for the trainers. "What the hell is going on here?" he asked, his voice low but edged with a heat she wasn't used to hearing from him. Carla blinked, confused. "Sir?" The girls, he said. 2 of them. In cleaning gear. In my gym. Right now. Her face drained of color. She looked down, guilty. I was going to report it yesterday, but I didn't know what to do. They just showed up. No one told them to come, I swear. Who are they? Jason demanded, although he already suspected the answer. They're Claire Blake's kids, Carla said. She's been in the hospital for almost 2 weeks now. The girls said if she didn't finish her shifts, she'd get fired. They said they didn't want her to lose the job. I didn't have the heart to stop them. Jason's throat tightened. Claire had been on his cleaning staff for years. She was quiet, punctual, never once complained, never asked for anything. He'd barely spoken more than a few words to her since the day she was hired. She worked nights, usually when he wasn't around. And now she was in a hospital bed, while her children wiped down sweat-covered machines before the sun was up. He didn't say another word. He turned and walked straight back to the gym floor. The girls were now scrubbing the mirrors along the back wall. One of them was standing on her tiptoes to reach a higher spot, her small frame barely stretching high enough. Jason approached slowly, stopping a few feet behind them. "What are your names?" he asked, gently this time. They both turned. One of them stepped forward. "I'm Emma," she said, and then motioned to her sister. "That's Ellie." He nodded. "Emma and Ellie. I'm Jason." "We know," Ellie said, her voice almost a whisper. "You own the place." Jason managed a tight smile. "Yeah. That's right." He crouched again, more steadily this time. "Listen, I know you're trying to help your mom. But this isn't your job. You don't have to do this." Emma looked down at her gloves, twisting the red rubber fingers around her wrist. "If we don't, she might lose her job," she said quietly. "She worked so hard to get it. She said this place saved us." Jason felt that statement land hard. He'd opened this gym to change lives, to give people a place where they could feel strong again. But it had never occurred to him that someone might rely on it just to survive. He looked between them, 2 mirror images of quiet courage, standing in the middle of polished marble floors and luxury equipment with the weight of their family's survival resting on their tiny shoulders. He stood again and placed a gentle hand on each of their backs. "You don't have to clean anymore. I promise you, your mom isn't going to lose her job." Emma bit her lip. "But what if she?" Jason cut her off, softly. "I'll take care of it. Okay? I give you my word." They nodded slowly, uncertain but too tired to protest. He guided them to the employee lounge and asked Carla to bring them something warm to drink and a place to rest. Then he made 2 phone calls. The first was to the hospital where Claire was staying. He demanded to speak to her doctor and get the full update on her condition. The second was to his personal assistant, instructing her to clear his schedule and get in touch with the best private care providers available. Money wasn't the issue. Time wasn't either. What mattered was that a line had been crossed, and now he had to be the one to draw a new one. Later that day, as the sun fully rose and the gym began to buzz with wealthy clients and their sculpted trainers, no one noticed the quiet absence of the 2 little girls. Jason had arranged for a trusted caretaker to take them home and watch over them while he sorted everything else out. He wasn't sure yet what he would tell Claire when she woke up. He didn't know what kind of help she'd be willing to accept. But what he did know, with absolute certainty, was this: Emma and Ellie would never have to clean his gym again. Not while he had anything to say about it. Jason arrived at the hospital that afternoon with a tension in his chest he hadn't felt in years. The building stood in stark contrast to the glass and steel luxury of the world he usually inhabited. Its beige walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and scent of antiseptic brought back memories he had buried deep, nights spent beside his mother's hospital bed, the quiet whir of machines keeping her alive longer than she wanted, the way the nurses whispered when they thought he wasn't listening. It was strange how grief could remain dormant for years, only to rise with sudden, suffocating clarity the moment you stepped through a door like this. He took a slow breath, walked to the reception desk, and gave Claire's name. The nurse looked up at him with wary kindness before directing him to the ICU on the 4th floor. The hallway leading to her room was lined with identical doors and a low hum of machines. When he reached her room, he paused outside for a moment, looking through the glass. Claire lay motionless, pale against the white sheets, with an oxygen tube taped gently beneath her nose. Her hair was pulled back, her hands resting stiffly by her sides. She looked small. Not weak, exactly, but worn down. As if life had been pushing against her for so long that her body had simply given in, just for a little while. A nurse stepped out of the room next door and nodded at him. "You're here for Claire Blake?" she asked softly. "Yes," Jason said, his voice low. "I'm her employer." The nurse didn't look surprised. "She's stable." But her collapse wasn't just from exhaustion. Malnutrition, stress, untreated infection, she's been running on fumes for months, maybe years. She'll need long-term care, not just a few nights of rest. Jason nodded, absorbing every word. "Does she have any family?" "Just her daughters. The twins. But no adult relatives listed. No emergency contact." "Then I want to cover everything," Jason said without hesitation. "Private recovery room, nutritionist, therapy, whatever she needs. No paperwork, no questions. I'll take care of it." The nurse studied him for a long moment. There was no hint of arrogance in his tone, no air of performance. Just a man who had made a decision and wouldn't back down from it. "She's lucky," the nurse said simply. "Most people don't get this kind of help." "She's not lucky," Jason replied. "She's overdue for some kindness." They let him sit with her for a few minutes. The machines beeped steadily, her chest rose and fell, and he watched her in silence. He didn't know much about Claire beyond what the HR file said. Hired 5 years ago. Reliable. Low profile. Cleaned 3 nights a week and never asked for overtime. But now, knowing her daughters, hearing what they had said, seeing her like this, he felt as if a whole life had been hidden just beneath his own and he had never bothered to look. Guilt crept in, quiet and sharp. He reached forward and gently touched her hand. It was cold, but not lifeless. "Your girls are safe," he said softly. "They've done more than anyone should ever have to. Now it's your turn to rest." As he left the hospital, Jason called his assistant again. He gave her new instructions: arrange for a live-in nurse once Claire was discharged, find a private tutor for the twins, and coordinate with a therapist who specialized in trauma for children. He didn't want the girls to simply survive this. He wanted them to heal. Back at his apartment, the silence felt heavier than usual. The space, always so sleek and composed, now seemed sterile in contrast to the messy, beautiful chaos he'd witnessed that day. For the first time in years, he sat on his living room floor, not the couch, not his designer armchair, but the floor, and opened an old photo album he hadn't touched in over a decade. His mother smiled back at him from the pages, always in motion, cooking, cleaning, holding his hand as a boy. Her eyes carried the same quiet strength he had seen in Claire's daughters. That night, Jason didn't sleep much. He kept thinking about how easily he could have missed them. If he had been 10 minutes later that morning, or if he had chosen a different location for his workout, he might never have seen Emma and Ellie. Never known. Never remembered. And the thought terrified him. Because if he had missed them, he wouldn't just have failed them. He would have failed the boy he used to be, the one who had once worn red gloves and helped his mother clean. By morning, he knew what he had to do. It wasn't enough to protect Claire and the girls behind the scenes. He wanted to be present. Visible. A constant. Because they weren't just someone else's responsibility anymore. They were his. The sun had barely risen when Jason pulled up in front of the modest brick building where Emma and Ellie lived. A woman named Teresa, the caretaker he had arranged to watch the girls after their first early morning at the gym, met him at the door with a tired smile and a clipboard in her hand. The apartment was small, cramped, and filled with the kind of quiet chaos that only children could create: crayons on the kitchen table, a forgotten sock on the floor, an open book face down on the arm of the couch. It wasn't messy in a negligent way. It was lived in, and Jason found himself surprised by how familiar it felt. It reminded him of the places he and his mother used to live in, tight spaces that held love, struggle, and exhaustion all at once. Emma and Ellie were sitting on the floor in their pajamas, surrounded by coloring pages. When they saw Jason, they didn't leap up or squeal with excitement. Instead, they looked at him like someone who'd returned home after a long trip, expected, but still somehow comforting. He crouched beside them, careful not to disrupt the paper chaos. "Can I see what you're working on?" he asked. Ellie held up her page. It was a rough drawing of 3 people, 2 small girls and a taller figure standing between them. All 3 held hands. Jason noticed the tall figure wore a shirt with a badge that looked suspiciously like the gym's logo. "That's me?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light. Emma nodded. "You're helping us." He looked at the paper for a moment longer than he meant to, then cleared his throat and smiled. "Well, you two are pretty easy to help." Teresa gave him a quick update while the girls returned to their drawings. They had been sleeping well, eating well, and surprisingly, hadn't cried once since their mother had been hospitalized. Jason didn't know whether to feel proud or worried. That kind of strength in children often came from necessity, not peace. But at least for now, they were safe. They were warm. They were kids. "I was thinking," Jason said as he stood, addressing Teresa, "I want them to come stay with me for a while. At least until their mom is discharged." Teresa raised an eyebrow but didn't protest. "You sure about that?" "I've got space. And they shouldn't be here alone if something happens. I want them closer. Anne. I don't want them to feel like this is temporary." That word, temporary, had lingered in Jason's mind since the first night he saw the girls at the gym. Everything about their lives had felt like it could fall apart at any moment, like the floor under them wasn't quite solid. He couldn't erase their past, but maybe he could help build something more stable for their future. By noon that same day, he had the girls packed into the back seat of his SUV, their backpacks filled with clothes, books, and a few stuffed animals. They didn't talk much during the drive, just whispered occasionally to each other. Jason didn't push. He let them settle into the silence, into the strangeness of a new chapter. His penthouse, previously pristine and professionally maintained, was transformed within a matter of hours. The guest rooms were redecorated. One became a shared bedroom filled with soft blankets, pillows, fairy lights, and framed prints of their favorite cartoons. The other was turned into a playroom with an art table, bean bags, and shelves for books and toys. A tutor was hired that evening, someone warm and intuitive who came with glowing recommendations from a local children's advocacy center. When the girls walked into their new room for the first time, they stood in the doorway without moving. Jason waited, watching them. It wasn't excitement that came first, it was disbelief. Slowly, Emma stepped inside and ran her hand over the blanket. Ellie touched the glowing string lights above the headboard. Then, without warning, Emma turned and hugged Jason around the waist. It was the kind of hug that said thank you without saying a word. "I've never had my own bed," she whispered. Jason crouched down, returning the hug gently. "Well, now you have one. And it's yours. As long as you need it." That night, Jason sat outside their door, listening. The girls giggled for a while, whispering under the covers, then fell asleep quickly. He stayed there for a long time, just listening to the sound of their steady breathing. It brought him a peace he hadn't known he was missing. It made the silence in his home feel different, no longer cold, but full of meaning. Later, he sat alone in the living room, sipping a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He looked out at the city lights but didn't see them. Instead, he thought of Claire, still in the hospital, unaware that her daughters were safe, cared for, beginning to laugh again. He wondered what she would think of him, of the man who had shown up out of nowhere and changed their lives. Would she be grateful? Suspicious? Angry? Maybe all three. But the truth was, Jason didn't do it for recognition. He didn't even fully understand why he was doing it, only that something inside him had shifted the moment those girls looked up at him and said they were helping their mother. That sentence had unearthed something buried so deeply inside of him he'd forgotten it was there. He hadn't saved them. Not yet. But he had made them a promise. And for the first time in years, he wasn't just a CEO. He wasn't a brand. He was a man with a home, and now, 2 little hearts depending on him to protect it. Claire woke up 2 days later, just after dawn, her vision hazy and her throat painfully dry. The beeping of machines was steady beside her, a rhythmic confirmation that she was still here, still breathing. Her body ached as if it had been run through a storm, but beneath the discomfort was a deeper sensation, confusion. She remembered the last moments clearly, the dizziness at work, the way her legs gave out near the staff locker room, how everything had gone dark before she could even call for help. And now she was in a hospital bed, hooked to tubes, her mouth tasting faintly of saline and fear. She blinked slowly, and as her eyes adjusted, she realized she wasn't alone. Sitting in the corner of the room, dressed in a clean but wrinkled dress shirt and watching her with cautious intensity, was Jason Carter. He didn't speak at first, just stood and walked to the side of her bed. There was something unfamiliar in his face, a tenderness she hadn't expected. She tried to sit up, but he raised his hand gently. "Don't move too fast," he said softly. "You've been through a lot." Her throat burned as she tried to speak. "The girls. They're safe," he said immediately. "They're with me." She blinked again, as if those words didn't make sense. "With you?" Jason nodded, pulling a chair closer to her side. "I found them. At the gym. Cleaning, early in the morning. They told me about you." Claire's lips trembled. "Oh God. They weren't supposed to. I didn't know they'd actually go." "They did," he said. "Because they love you. And they were terrified of losing you." Tears began to fill her eyes. She turned her head slightly, ashamed. Jason didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He simply reached out and placed his hand gently over hers. "You don't have to apologize," he said. "You've done more than most people could. You held everything together until your body physically couldn't anymore. That's not failure, Claire. That's exhaustion." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time saw not the man who owned the gym, not the face on the posters behind the front desk, but a person, someone who had sat beside her hospital bed when he didn't have to, who had found her children and given them a place to sleep that wasn't full of fear and broken promises. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. He leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable for a moment. "Because I saw myself in your girls," he said quietly. "And I saw my mother in you. She worked herself to death cleaning hotels while raising me on her own. No one ever helped her. And I always promised myself that if I ever had the chance to be that person for someone else, I would be." Claire's tears fell freely now, silent and unrelenting. She didn't try to stop them. Jason stayed with her as the nurses came and checked her vitals, as the doctor explained her recovery would be slow but manageable with proper care, and that she would be transferred to a private facility for rehabilitation, one that Jason had already arranged. When she protested, he didn't argue. He just told her the bills were handled, the girls were happy, and this wasn't charity. It was respect. That afternoon, Claire spoke to Emma and Ellie for the first time over a video call. The girls were sitting on a big bed with stuffed animals all around them, their hair neatly brushed, their cheeks full of color. When they saw her on the screen, they burst into tears, clinging to each other and talking over one another in breathless waves. Claire cried too, her hand pressed to her heart, her voice cracking as she told them she was okay and that she missed them more than anything in the world. Behind the camera, Jason watched from a distance, saying nothing, just allowing the moment to be theirs. After the call, Claire looked at Jason and said, "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he replied. "Just focus on getting better. They need you. And they deserve the best version of you." In the days that followed, Jason continued to visit. Sometimes he brought updates from the girls, a drawing, a question they'd asked about when she'd be home, a small gift they'd picked out for her. Other times, he just sat in silence, reading quietly beside her bed. He didn't ask for stories about her past, didn't press for confessions or explanations. He gave her space, and in that space, she began to rebuild. For Claire, the recovery was not just physical, it was emotional. For the first time in years, she felt like the burden of survival wasn't hers to carry alone. And that shift, more than any medication, began to restore something she thought she'd lost forever, her dignity. One evening, as Jason helped adjust her pillows, she looked at him and said softly, "You didn't save me, you know. You just gave me a chance to save myself." He nodded, his voice just as quiet. That was always the point. And in that shared understanding, something unspoken formed between them, not romance, not yet, but trust. Something stronger. Something true. Claire's release from the hospital came nearly 4 weeks after her collapse. By then, she had regained enough strength to walk without assistance, though her steps were still cautious, and her body reminded her daily of the limits she had ignored for too long. But what surprised her most wasn't the recovery itself, it was what waited for her when she stepped out into the world again. Jason had insisted on picking her up himself, arriving at the clinic in a charcoal gray SUV with quiet music playing and a paper bag of her favorite tea resting on the passenger seat. She hadn't told him what kind she liked. The girls had. The ride to his penthouse was silent at first, not from awkwardness, but from awe. Claire had never been in a car so clean, so silent, so smooth. She stared out the window at a city that felt unfamiliar after weeks inside a hospital room. When they pulled into the underground garage, Jason helped her out with a quiet gentleness she didn't expect from someone so used to power. He led her into the building through a private elevator that opened directly into his apartment. As the doors slid open, she stepped into a space unlike anything she'd known, floor-to-ceiling windows, warm wood and steel accents, tall bookshelves, and in the center of it all, a living room that looked as if someone actually lived there now. Toys were scattered near the couch, art taped to the refrigerator, and a pair of small shoes resting near the door. Emma and Ellie were waiting. They ran to her with shrieks and open arms, hugging her so tightly she gasped. Claire dropped to her knees, holding them both, pressing her face into their hair as if to convince herself they were real. They looked stronger, calmer, happier. She could feel it in the way they hugged her, not out of desperation but love. When she finally stood, tears in her eyes, she turned to Jason. "They're different," she said softly. "They're safe," he replied. "That changes people." Claire was shown to her room, a space Jason had helped prepare with soft colors, fresh linens, and a window overlooking the skyline. It didn't feel temporary. It felt intentional. Over the next few days, Claire moved slowly, adjusting to this new rhythm. The girls went to school during the day with their new backpacks and lunch boxes, and in the afternoons, a tutor came to help with reading and math. Claire attended short physical therapy sessions and spent quiet mornings drinking tea on the balcony while Jason worked in his office down the hall. They didn't speak constantly, but when they did, the conversation felt effortless. He asked questions, but never intrusive ones. She told stories, but never the ones she wasn't ready to share. They found a balance that felt like breathing. One evening, as twilight dipped over the city, they all gathered for dinner at a long oak table Jason hadn't used in years. Claire cooked. It was nothing extravagant, chicken, rice, and a simple salad, but it was hers. Jason had offered to order something in, but she had refused with a soft smile. "I want to cook for them," she had said. "I haven't done that in too long." The girls set the table, bickering playfully over who got to place the napkins. Jason watched them from the doorway, his heart fuller than he could remember. They sat, they ate, and they laughed, not nervously or politely, but fully. There was joy in the room, the kind of joy that comes after long sadness. The kind that has to be earned. After dinner, while the girls colored at the kitchen counter, Claire stepped out onto the balcony with Jason. The sky was deep blue now, with a few early stars peeking through the haze of the city. She leaned on the railing and glanced at him. "Do you ever wonder how we got here?" she asked. Jason nodded. "Every day. You could have just called someone. Sent money. Assigned a manager to handle it. I know. But you didn't." "I couldn't," he said. "It stopped being a situation and started being people. That makes all the difference." Claire looked out at the lights below. "I think I stopped expecting people to care somewhere along the way. I know what that feels like." She turned to him, her expression soft but searching. "Why did you?" Jason didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Because if I had let myself ignore it, I would have gone back to who I used to be. Cold. Detached. Watching life instead of living it. But then your daughters showed up, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to be needed." Claire swallowed, emotion flickering in her eyes. "And now? Now I don't want to go back." They stood in silence for a long moment, the breeze light against their skin. Inside, the girls were giggling again. Jason turned to her. "You don't owe me anything, Claire." "I know," she replied. "But I still want to give something back." "You already have." And she had. More than she realized. Without intending to, Claire and her daughters had pulled Jason out of the glass tower he'd built for himself and into a life where connection mattered more than control. They had reminded him that not everything worth building came with blueprints and business plans. That night, after the girls went to bed, Claire walked past Jason's office and paused. The door was open. He was seated at his desk, flipping through sketches, designs for a new space, something labeled "The Blake Program" in his handwriting. A resource center for working single mothers, offering childcare, education, and job training. She didn't say anything, just smiled to herself and kept walking. There was still so much ahead. Legalities. Boundaries. Healing. But there was also trust, warmth, and something slowly growing between them that neither could yet name. And sometimes, Claire thought, that was enough. Just knowing that they had turned the corner and were no longer just surviving, but beginning, finally, to live. As September came and the city shifted from the sleepy haze of summer into the rhythm of school routines and cooler air, the apartment above the skyline settled into something that resembled a life. Not a temporary arrangement, not a fragile pause between chapters, but a life that breathed on its own, full of structure, warmth, and moments that were soft without being fragile. Claire, now well into her recovery, had regained her strength in ways that went beyond the physical. Her face, once pale and thin, now held color again. Her posture had changed too, no longer guarded and hunched, but open. She moved through the apartment with a quiet grace, helping the girls prepare for school in the mornings, organizing the growing stack of homework sheets, and even teasing Jason when he couldn't figure out the child-proof locks on a new cabinet. Jason had changed as well, though the shift was subtler. He still worked, still ran his business with sharp precision and unflinching authority, but his energy was different. More grounded. He started coming home earlier. He turned down invitations to late dinners and closed-door meetings. He made breakfast with the girls twice a week and began keeping a notepad on his nightstand, not for work ideas, but for things the girls said that made him laugh or think. His world, once built of steel and silence, now had voices in it, voices that called his name when a shoe went missing or when someone needed help with spelling. And he had grown to love those interruptions more than he ever imagined. Claire had started working with him on a new initiative called the Blake Program, a name Jason insisted on even though she tried to convince him otherwise. The project would become a flagship part of his fitness company's community division, offering free childcare, job placement, and health education to women like Claire, women who worked invisible jobs and held entire families together while no one noticed. They spent long afternoons drafting ideas, reviewing budget allocations, designing floor plans that included soft lighting and open spaces where people could breathe and feel seen. They disagreed sometimes, Claire arguing for practicality, Jason for innovation, but the arguments were the kind born of shared purpose, not division. And after every disagreement came a compromise that neither had to force. One Friday evening, after the girls had gone to a sleepover for the first time since Claire's hospitalization, the apartment felt uncharacteristically quiet. Jason made tea while Claire sat on the couch with her legs tucked beneath her, a worn sweater draped over her shoulders. They were used to the girls' chatter, the constant movement of little bodies and bright voices. Without it, the silence felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. "They're going to outgrow us," Claire said with a smile that was mostly fondness, but with a pinch of melancholy. Jason handed her the tea. "That's the point, isn't it?" Claire nodded slowly. "Still hard to think about. After everything." Jason sat beside her, not too close, but close enough to share the silence. "They'll grow up. But they'll never forget who showed up when it mattered." She looked at him, her eyes softer than usual. "And what about you? When all this settles, when they're older and don't need us every minute, what happens then?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked out the window, watching the glow of the city stretch in every direction like a living map of every choice he'd ever made. Then he turned to her. "Then we figure out what's next. Together, if you want." Claire held his gaze, and something passed between them that didn't need to be spoken aloud. It wasn't a confession or a promise. It was a recognition. That they had been building something all along, not just stability or healing, but something deeper. A partnership. Maybe even the beginning of love, though neither of them dared name it just yet. A week later, the official announcement of the Blake program went live on the company's website, accompanied by photos of Claire, Jason, and the girls standing in front of the first center under construction. The response was immediate: emails from other CEOs, nonprofit leaders, single parents, and even former employees who had never expected Jason Carter to become the face of something so deeply personal. There were skeptics, of course. People who said it was just a PR stunt, a feel-good cover for a businessman's past indifference. But Jason didn't care. He knew the truth. And so did Claire. The morning of the groundbreaking ceremony, Jason stepped into the girls' room to wake them up. Emma blinked sleepily and asked, "Are you nervous?" He smiled. "A little. Mom says when you're nervous, it means you care." "She's right." Ellie sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Can we say something at the microphone today?" Jason hesitated. "What would you say?" Ellie shrugged. "Just that we're not scared anymore." Jason nodded, his throat tight. "Then yes. You absolutely can." As they drove to the ceremony, Claire reached over and took his hand. It was a small gesture, but it held weight. It said, without words, "You didn't just help us. You became one of us." And in Jason's heart, he finally believed it too. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Blake program took place on an unusually warm morning in early October. The city shimmered with that golden light that only autumn mornings seem to possess, rich and clear, with just enough breeze to lift hair and flags but not enough to chill the skin. People began to gather outside the new community center long before the scheduled time, filling the modest sidewalk with a kind of quiet anticipation. There were mothers with strollers, curious passers-by, employees from Jason's fitness chain, local officials, and a scattering of media representatives, their cameras already set up and humming. But the real heart of the crowd were the people the center had been built for: single parents, working mothers, families who recognized something of themselves in the name printed on the banner that hung above the entrance. Claire stood near the makeshift stage, dressed in a simple navy dress, her hair pinned up, her posture proud. Jason stood beside her, one hand on the shoulder of Ellie, the other resting gently on Emma's back. The girls wore matching dresses and red headbands, both chosen without his input, but he loved how strong they looked standing there, eyes clear, feet planted. The speeches were brief by design. Jason kept his words focused on the people. He spoke not as a businessman, but as someone who had witnessed resilience up close. He talked about the invisible labor of single mothers, about the nights when survival is the only priority, about how easy it is to overlook the ones who never ask for help. He didn't speak about himself. Instead, he thanked Claire for her courage and called her the heart of the program. When she stepped forward to speak, the applause lasted longer than either of them expected. Claire's voice was steady as she began. She didn't write a speech, she simply told her story. She talked about working night shifts, hiding worry from her daughters, and the moment her body gave out. Then she talked about waking up and finding out that someone had noticed. That someone hadn't turned away. She didn't say Jason's name at first, but everyone knew who she meant. "I used to believe strength meant doing everything on your own," she said. "Now I know it also means letting people in." When she finished, there was silence for a moment, then the kind of applause that doesn't just echo, it sinks in. Jason watched her with something that wasn't just admiration. It was deeper. It was the awareness that she had become not just a story he had helped, but a voice others would now follow. Then came the moment Ellie had been waiting for. Claire bent down and handed her the microphone. She and Emma stepped forward together, hands clasped tightly, and looked out at the crowd with the kind of bravery that only children possess, completely unaware of how brave they truly are. "We just want to say thank you," Ellie began. "We're not scared anymore. Because now we know we're not alone." Emma nodded beside her, then added quietly, "And we want to help other kids feel that too." The audience melted. Cameras flashed. Jason blinked hard to keep his own emotions from spilling over, and when the ribbon was finally cut, by all four of them, holding scissors together, it felt more like opening a home than a building. In the weeks that followed, the Blake program came to life quickly. Applications poured in. Volunteers signed up in record numbers. The space became a hub not just of service, but of healing. Claire oversaw day-to-day operations, working side by side with counselors, teachers, and social workers, while Jason remained behind the scenes, funding, supporting, stepping in when needed, but never crowding the work. He didn't need credit. He just wanted to watch it grow. At home, the girls thrived. Their world was no longer defined by anxiety or whispers. They went to school with lunchboxes filled with notes, slept in warm beds, and laughed freely. Claire often caught them singing in the hallway or making up dances in the living room. They were still children, but now, they were children who felt safe. One night, several months after the opening, Jason came home late from a meeting. The apartment was quiet. Claire was sitting on the couch reading, her legs tucked beneath her, a blanket over her shoulders. The girls had already gone to bed. Without speaking, he sat beside her and leaned his head back against the cushion. "Long day?" she asked. He nodded, exhaling. "Good, but long." They sat in silence for a few minutes, and then she reached for his hand. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple and instinctive. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice low. "About what comes next." He looked at her, the question in his eyes. "I don't know if this is what you planned when you opened that gym," she continued. "Or when you built all of this. But you didn't just change our lives, Jason. You changed yours too." He nodded slowly, his voice almost a whisper. "And I wouldn't go back for anything." There was no need for declarations. No dramatic proclamations of love or forever. There was something more important in that moment: presence, trust, and the kind of peace that comes only when two people have walked through fire and still chosen to sit beside each other after the flames have died down. Outside, the city moved forward, unaware of the quiet transformation that had taken place in a penthouse filled with art projects, mismatched shoes, and love born not from fairy tales, but from real, hard-earned living. And that, in its quietest, most honest way, was everything. The ending of this story is deeply human, and that's what gives it power. It doesn't rely on fantasy or dramatic rescue, it relies on real people choosing to show up for one another when they don't have to. Jason, a man shaped by wealth and loss, finds redemption not through grand gestures, but through consistent presence. Claire, a mother who spent her life surviving, finally receives the space to breathe, rebuild, and stand tall. And the twins, Emma and Ellie, are no longer defined by fear, but by hope and safety. What makes this conclusion meaningful is how grounded it is. There's no perfection here, just growth, tenderness, and the slow, honest building of trust. The fact that love isn't rushed or romanticized, but allowed to emerge from respect and shared experience, makes it feel real. It's a story about invisible people becoming seen. About the small, brave work of creating family, not through blood, but through choice. The final message isn't just that healing is possible, but that sometimes, when we let others in, we don't just save them, we save ourselves, too.